Wei to do the presentation today. What she's going to be talking about is a little bit more of an advanced topic area, dealing more with research. So the idea of doing this today really is to showcase where and how analytics gets used in research, right? So this is a little bit more, so don't get overwhelmed because some of the techniques and the terms that she will be using are perhaps not going to be as familiar, right? We know that, but nevertheless, I thought it was a good idea to introduce some of these advanced topic areas. Wei, I have a long-standing relationship again with Wei. She is completing her PhD next week. So next week she will be called Dr. Wei, and she has taken up a faculty position at Appalachian State University in North Carolina. It's up in the hills of the Appalachian Mountain Range, and she will be starting there August 10th, I think, as an assistant professor of information systems and decision sciences. So with that, we have the inaugural class for the MBA in Business Analytics, Data Analytics at Akal University and the Akal Business School. And we have a class of about 12 people, I think, 12 students, right? What we'll do is you go ahead and complete your presentation, and then I'm sure there are going to be questions from the students as well, and we will take them towards the end of the presentation. Over to you, Wei.
Hello, everyone. For the invite, before I start it, let me start sharing my screen.
Sumendra, can you mute? I think there is echo coming in the background. Yeah, good. Okay, carry on, Wei.
Okay. Hold a second. Let me share my screen here. Why I don't see that? Share. Interesting. You'll not be able to. Will you be able to see it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Is it a whole screen or it doesn't look like a whole screen? This is the one share. All right. You see the whole screen? Dr. Dillon, did you see the whole screen? Yes. Okay. Because there are two screens, and one is for my own references, and the other one is for you guys to see.
This looks good. Carry on.
Okay, great. Okay. Hello. Again, my name is Wei. I just got my assistant professorship at CIS department at the Walker School of Business at the Appalachian State University. It is my honor today here to do this presentation, and thanks, Dr. Dillon, for the invite. And as a matter of fact, Dr. Dillon is my advisor, the dissertation advisor, and I'm very grateful for his guidance and his knowledge, so I can come this far. Thank you, Dr. Dillon. Dr. Dillon told me that you are studying MBA programs, right? At Akal University. So first of all, I'd like to offer you congratulations. Learning is not only fun, but also rewarding. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And of course, learning can be challenging and is constantly stretching us out of our comfort zone. So I wish you all the best of luck. Today, Dr. Dillon wants me to give you a little bit more, a bit taste of business analytics, so you know what to look for in the future studies. So I'm happy to share my own studies for my PhD dissertation, and it is a quantitative study, so it is part of considered business analytics. But first thing first, before I studied, I wanted to clear the definition, like what is a business analytics. In general, The business analytics means that we are applying all kinds of skills, technologies, and a scientific method in order to explore and investigate of what's happened already in the past to gain insight for the future. So the significance is that through business analytics that we can predict and plan better and prevent bad things from happening in the future. In particular, the business analytics focus on developing new insights and understandings of a business phenomenon using data and statistical tools. Therefore, according to the definition we just described here, right? So we need to have a phenomenon of interest first. And those are the problems we wanted to tackle or wanted to solve. So for this studies, as you can see from the title, that my problem is information disorder on the social media. The information disorder in my studies concludes all kinds of misleading, unethical informations that, like, for example, can be misinformation, disinformation, fake news, rumors, etc. And secondly, when you look at my titles, it says there's a perspectives, right? So what exactly is perspectives in an analytics, an analysis? So when we have a problems in our hand, trying to solve, we all know there are many ways we can look at this problem to analyze it, right? So the perspective actually to put in an analogy, it's more like a magnifying glasses you choose to investigate the problem in your hands. So we blow out the problems to see in more details. My perspective, as you can see, is morality, okay? The meaning that I want to see what's the moral problems associated with us sharing the wrong, deceitful, and harmful information on the social media. So the following slides, I'm going to cover the studies in details, so you can, understand what is the business analytics in a specific research project. Problems. First and first, like we discussed before, we need to have a problems, right? So we say the problem, like in my discussion, is the information disorder on social media is a problem. Why do we think it's a problem? Because it causes disturbing emotions in us, like fears, angers, and doubt, anxieties. It can erode our confidence and the public and the trust as well within relationships. And information disorder can frame mainstream media's narratives, actually change a nationwide or even a worldwide political structures. I'm sure that you all know that in 2016, US presidential campaigns, right? The leaking of Clinton's emails, personal private emails, and also the tweets by Donald Trump kind of like recharted the whole election results. So it's great impacts. And we can tell from those examples as well that information disorder can manipulate people's behavior, your attitudes. Again, the 2016 US presidential campaign actually demonstrated that it can change our voting behavior effectively. Another consequences for information disorder on the social media is that it can cause actual loss in the sense of monies, right? The market causes to the individual and the societies. The research report that fake news actually can cost stock market as much as $80 billion annually. So it's a huge, just due to the fake news that spread that we watched or we received on the social media. So, information disorder is a serious problem. However, on the other hand on the other side of the story is that as a society, we are increasingly relying on the social media to get informations, all right? Like there are two pieces of evidence at least here, 55% of US adults and between 40 to 60% adults in the developed countries actually relatively readily rely on the news on the social media. And 52 Generation Z, they trust whatever they follow on the social media for advices. So we got a problem, but people just constantly just follow these behavior patterns and rely on the news on the social media. So as a result, the World Economic Forum back in 2013 actually named the misinformation on the social media or online as a top 10, one of the top 10 technology broad risk to which the world needs to pay attention to. So it's a problem. We got our problems, right? So where does the problem come from? Of course, there are two major reasons, okay? The first one, of course, is attributed to the technology itself, social media technology itself, right? For example, social media as a communication technology enables quick and global information diffusion, and social media facilitate individual level participations in a mass scale, and everybody can participate in it, right? And the social media also as a new media, it's not regulated as a traditional media like newspapers and televisions. Therefore, and also the fourth reason is that the social media, we kind of like form different groups and ties on the social media based on the trust, based on the what kind of the relationship, and whether we like each other or we are sharing the same kind of mindset, right? So those kind of social ties and end up dictating what kind of information we share with each other and what kind of information we receive, and ultimately then can have impact on our outlook about the world and about any particular issues. The second reason we attribute for the problem is that we attribute to the social media user itself. As you can see from the slides, the social media user generate information disorder ourselves. People enjoy sharing and communicate everyday information on the social media, right? We are humans, we like to share. And so as a sender and receivers, we started to interpret the information we received. And this interpretation means that the information can be subjective. It is subjected to our knowledge, to our emotion or mood at the moment, and also subjected to the cognitive limitations, such as memories and all kinds of bias. And for the memories, what I mentioned here, there's a great examples, okay? Our memory can fool us and create a lot of mistakes. We all know the eyewitness programs, right? We know that eyewitness called to the bench of the court that provides testimonies can, deliver the verdict. So that's, people's lives on the bench, on the eyewitness. However, the caveat is that rather than our brain can record our experience flawlessly in our brain, in our mind, the memory a lot of times fool us. And scientific evidence has shown that we can make frequent errors and can't even remember the whole thing does not even exist. So very serious limitations of human cognitions, right? And in addition, the context of events can add to the information disorder in the social media. A good example is like, for example, we say that telling a lie is, bad things to do. However, when you consider telling a white lies, that is accepted by many kind of societies. Say one day your friends come to you and say, hey, I got my new haircut. Do you like it or not? Usually you won't hurt your friendship, you won't hurt your friends. You're choosing to say, hey, yeah, I think it looks good on you, right? That's very typical scenarios in our daily lives. So what I'm saying is that the context actually can add to the complexity of information disorders, right? And lastly, the whole range of peoples, like conspiracy theories, our politicians, and prominent trolls, even the government, they create all kinds of informations, wrong informations out of all kinds of purposes and agendas, trying to mislead you or kind of divert your attentions. So that those adds the complexity. Technology adds to it, and people, humans, organizations actually actively contribute to the information disorder. So we got our problems. It's a huge problem we can see, right? Causing loss, causing the attitudes, behavior problems, and chart our political power structures. So a lot of research then, of course, trying to understand why, okay, this is a problem. We wanted to resolve it. We want to solve it. And a lot of researchers jump in there trying to disentangle this phenomenon, this problem. According to the research currently, okay, there are three unanswered or remained to be answered questions. So they are, at least here, so how individuals react to the information disorder and how they make subsequent sharing decisions, and why people are sharing misleading information deliberately or unintentionally, and how, lastly, is how we intervene this kind of behaviors, right? As we discussed it in the previous slide about
Hello, we can't hear you. Wei, you're frozen. Are you on a Wi-Fi network? I think. Hello. I think she had some Wi-Fi problem. She'll come back. I think, let's give her a minute. In the meanwhile, any questions you want to discuss, talk about while she's trying to log back in?
It's a very, very interesting topic.
Yeah, it is. We didn't want to call it misinformation or disinformation. It is more of an information disorder, right? So
While she, anyway, so do students have any questions, comments so far? I find the whole thing very, very interesting. This is something I think about a lot. See, in good old days, that is how tribes worked. People will gather together in a chopal, and whatever happened there was news. Right? I mean, who cared about what's happening in the rest of the world? Here we are going back to tribalism, but that we are taking tribalism everywhere.
it's in the social media.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so it's like five people getting together and talking
hello,
about
I'm sorry,
independence.
I'm back on
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
They used to in England, they have a term called the commons.
Yeah.
Right. So the English use a term called the commons. So commons is a common place where everybody would come together and talk. And the city or the village would have access to that commons. So it's a common phrase in England. You'll say, "I'll meet you in the commons," which essentially means it's land that is shared by every person who's living in that village or a small town. It still exists even today. Uh, in India, you have a similar concept. And excuse me, Wei, I'm going to switch into vernacular to explain this.
Okay.
In Indian villages, they would say ki brotte de kol milte hain, right? So meeting near a brota means you are coming to a common place to share information, right? So that concept has always been there. I mean, what Facebook or LinkedIn, what they're doing is they've taken that common space and made it an electronic platform, and hence you have all sorts of issues related with how information gets transmitted and all that stuff. Over to you, Wei. We were just having a discussion while I think your connection was bad.
Yeah, I'm
sorry. Carry on. Carry on.
So the screen is still the same, right?
Yeah, it's still
okay.
there. It shows morality issues.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'm on this morality issues, right? Yes. So that's my perspective. I choose. So I look at this problem through the morality lenses. So why do I choose this? Because first of all, when information and behavior bearing direct impact on the humans and society, it has ethical or moral issues in it, significance in it, and for the information sharing. It's rely, because we don't have, I think we mentioned before that the information sharing doesn't have a lot of like regulation right now on the social media, right? So a lot of times we share the information on the media, so there's no guidance, legal guidance. So we rely on our internal ethical or moral codes. So it is important. And thirdly, I choose this more moral lenses is because the moral ethical issue becomes more and more important as we switch from physical world into the cyber world or virtual world. A lot of concepts has become changed. So for example, the AI algorithm bias, and also like we are more and more living in a behavior that's our called engineered behavior, because we get recommendation from the whatever the search engines, we follow the patterns or prompted the suggestions. So our behavior becomes like a generated behavior rather than that come from our own choices. So it becomes an issue. That's why I choose this particular lens to the studies. Actually, conduct our research. And the first
Wait,
thing,
are you on a Wi-Fi network or a wired network?
huh? I'm sorry.
Are you on a wired network or a Wi-Fi network?
Wi-Fi network.
Yeah, that's the problem. You have a bandwidth problem here.
Oh,
So
can you see my screen?
we can. You're breaking up as you go along, but anyways, carry on.
Okay, all right. So we have a few more steps to take before we actually conduct our research. The first step is we needed to ask research questions. Okay, if we think of us in a mystical problem, black boxes, we wanted to get out of this box to see the problem clearly, then we can think of a research question as a light. All right, the clear defined research question is serve as a good light, function of a good light. And so we won't get lost in the darkness. Research question actually
Gurpreet, do you think her stopping the video will help?
No, I think she's simply on a Wi-Fi network. It's just getting overwhelmed, and she's kicking off. My advice always to presenters is never be on a Wi-Fi network. Have a wired network. That always helps. But anyways, let her come back. So. Some of the joys of technology. So, and I think for the students, I think one thing you should always remember is when you're presenting and doing things of this kind, make sure your environment where you're sitting is very good. Make sure that you have a good wired connection, and all those things certainly go a long way in terms of presenting. And where you are muted.
okay, is it good now?
It is good. I think you have a connectivity problem, I think. So
It's kind of weird. It's not happening to me. I mean, I don't know why it happens today, because the internet shows okay, but I'm sorry. Okay, let me just carry on.
We just live in a third world country, way.
Yeah, no, it is right. yeah.
Go back and share again. Now you can see
Now,
it.
we can see it. Do you have a wired connection?
No, I cannot. Everything is
Okay.
Wi-Fi nowadays. The technology can fail us, right?
Wi-Fi will always fail you. Anyways, carry on.
All right. Okay. So my research questions, the broad research question is that, okay, why the moral intensity? We think the morality, or specifically moral intensity, can regulate the people's information disorder behavior on the social media. And under this big umbrella questions, I have 5 small questions. Why people are sharing misleading information on the social media, how does moral intensity impact information behaviors on the social media, and how moral philosophy influence people's deliberate information, disinformation sharing on the social
You're muted.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I don't know. It sounds like the computer doesn't want me to do my job today. Terrible.
You just need to move to a country with better Wi-Fi connections.
I know I need to move to India. India is better than, where I'm right now. God, this is horrible. Let me quickly jump back right into my sharing. All right. God. Sharing. So you see my screen now? Assuming?
Yeah.
Okay. So the qualitative study, let me go back a little bit more. Now I lost my track. Okay, so I got my research questions. The research question, now you said, well, you talk about the morality, right? So now you throw me this more intensity. What exactly is more intensity? Actually, morality is like a big perspectives, but under moralities, there are many different, of course, sub-perspectives, and the morality, more intensity is one I picked for the studies. In some that the more intensity, it's an evaluation process that evaluates, dilemmas in our hands. This evaluation process involving asking questions about the magnitude and the probability of the consequences, the time of the consequences, the social norm, and relationship to the impacted in the more dilemma. Therefore, dimensions underneath there in the concept of moral intensities. So as you can tell also from my research questions, other than the moral intensities, that's a major perspectives I use. I also interested to find out whether, the other reasons such as the people's moral philosophies and dark personalities and the mindfulness about the technologies actually also impact the people's sharing behaviors on the social media as well, right? So I got my research questions. Now, the next step is to ask what kind of tool we're going to use to conduct our research. And the tool I choose is called a structure equation model. That's a little bit technical that, it might get a little bit beyond, if you just studied the MBA studies, it might be a little bit beyond your knowledge, but don't worry about it, just hear me through. The structure equation model is just like a regression model, so similar, okay, but it's used for psychometrics analysis, psychology analysis, studies, and the sociology related analysis, okay. So it's called psychometrics modeling analysis to describe and explain a human related behaviors. And they use questionnaire. The questionnaire is a survey type to measure the constructs or the concepts in the models. And it's again, because it's a statistical analysis, so it's a numerical representation and the manipulation of observations in order to achieve statistical precisions. And any statistical research procedure, we know that we do the random sampling methods, so that allow us to make generalizations, right? And we use smart PLS, that is a software that conducts this kind of research, of course. And for structure modeling, equation modeling, they have the results usually consist of two parts. One is a measurement model, one is a structure model results. I'm going to touch a base, and in details later on. So turn out here's our models, right? We have problems, we have tools in our hands, and now it's our models we use to conduct our research. The structured models is also called the path models. Like statistical regression models, we always have a dependent variable, which is our information sharing. You can see it's called intention rather than actual sharing behavior, because it's very hard to capture the behavior, right? So we, to measure psychology analysis, usually use the intention a lot more rather than the behavior. And unlike the statistical regression models, it's more complicated. So rather than just A to B, that kind of equations that you can see here is a path, right? With arrows and the boxes all linked together. So this model represents how we conceptualize a user form his or her disinformation sharing intentions on the social media. And the arrow indicates the relationship actually between those boxes, okay? The box is also called the construct in the psychometrics models. The relationship, you can see there's H1A plus H1B, those are our hypotheses. And for any kind of statistical research, you need to form your hypothesis first, okay? And the plus and minus signs meaning specific relationship, whether it's a positive relationship, if it's a plus sign, then if it's a negative sign that we hypothesize is a negative relationship. So for example, the H1A in this model, it has a plus sign, and H1B has a minus sign. It means that we conceptualize that increased moral intensity evaluation can lead to heighten the sense of a perceived moral problem in our sharing, and then can decrease the disinformation sharing intentions. And lastly, you can see there's a little blue box here. This is called the moral scenarios. And it's a very common research practice for studies that involve sensitive ethical or moral issues, because it's too sensitive and too personal. So it's very hard to capture the truth. So you wanted to take the burden of on the people's shoulder, and then to use this what we call the moral scenario studies. We create stories, okay, and we prime our respondents. We ask the respondent to read a story, and then ask our respondents to think himself or herself in the similar situation, and then ask them to answer our survey questions. So now we see the whole models, and I'm going to, you can have a image to take a mind image in your head, and then we move on to talk about this hypothesis one by one. You can see that we have basically four big groups of hypotheses: H1, A and B; H2, A and B, that's related to dog personality, right? And H1 and H1A and B, that's related to our moral decision process. And H3A and B, that's related to moral philosophies. And two kinds of moral philosophy picked and selected for the studies. And then the fourth group of hypotheses related to the mindfulness about technologies. So just remember, have that in your mind, okay? So the first hypothesis group, right, H1 and B. for forming a hypothesis, basically is like we argue or we speculate the relationship, right? How do we make a good sound argument? How do we make a good speculations? We don't just think this, out of nowhere. It has to be grounded on the evidence. That means the previous research has been done in related to it. So conceptually, we follow this process, a research process, of course, to form our hypothesis. And the first group of hypotheses related to the decision making, because sharing or not sharing disinformation on a social media is a decision, right? And it is a moral decision according to these studies, because the decision can, ends up misleading or even hurting other individuals and hurting organizations and the society as a total, right? And the sharing decision, usually the more decision sharing decisions, starts from a environmental stimuli. So that's our scenarios, right? And people, when we are in this kind of scenario, we perceive whether there's a moral issue or not in the scenario, and then we form our intentions. And before we actually commit it to an action, that's what we call decision-making, sequence models. And that's the theory part, right? And also people kind of theorize this decision-making process. Of course, as a scientific research, we always ground our arguments on the evidence. So there are last two items, like I say, there are two items here that I'm listed here some, a couple of examples of a previous research that are based on these models. And so for example, think about it, and the two studies conducted in 1996 and 1999, they empirically tested these moral intensity models, and they see the positive influences on the marketing professionals' ethical issue perceptions and the behavior intention formations. And also there are other scientific evidence saying that the morality frame and the message, moral message in the contents actually increase the likelihood of sharing and intention. So based on those theory and scientific evidence, we form our hypothesis. And those are the hypotheses left at I put it out here on the right-hand side. The H1A, if you remember, right? So it says, a perceived moral problem can positively associate with the moral intensity evaluation of a disinformation sharing. And the individual with a higher moral intensity will recognize the moral issue more frequently than those with the lower moral intensities. The H1B hypothesis says that the perceived moral problem, if we perceived a moral problem in the scenarios, this perceived moral problem can negatively associate with the disinformation sharing intentions. That means that increase the perceived moral problem in the issue will decrease this, our sharing intention. So you can see that I formed my hypothesis on the previous research. That's the process you needed to learn. I'm not going to go through too much of the details of those hypotheses. All you needed to do is that that's how I form my hypothesis. And for any research, any studies, that's how we do it. Okay. The second group of hypotheses is about dark personalities. We hypothesized that the dark personality can have impact on the information sharing. Okay, their positive impact on the disinformation sharings. Why we choose this? Because personality theory has been used as a very stable predictors in all kinds of analysis to predict the behaviors of the human beings. And the dark personality, I choose the dark personalities because, like sharing those dark information, like information, this is like not a good behavior, right? You share misleading and wrong information. So I conceptualize it as a dark behavior, and dark behavior related to dark personality. That's how I argue through my hypothesis. And there's three kinds of dark personality: Machiavellism, narcissism, and psychopath. And of course, this three dark personalities, it's based on previous research and it has been, applied to previous research. So based on this evidence, again, I propose my speculations, right? And my hypothesis, and for my hypothesis, that's the second group of it. And the third group of it is moral philosophies, right? Our moral intensity, our lenses of morality actually is largely impacted by the moral philosophy. Actually, there are many kinds of moral philosophies. Largely, there are 5 major type of moral philosophies. And you, as a researcher, you get to choose what kind. You don't want it to go too broad because it makes the research, hard to conduct and hard to make your argument. So you're trying to narrow it down a little bit. For my research, I choose relativism and idealism. Why? Because it's a personal sharing is a personal decision. So these two philosophies are specifically talking about how we make our choices. So relativism says that we make our choices based on the natural of the situations. So every situation is different. So we make our justifications and the judgment are different based on each individual situations. And idealism, on the other hand, is like, oh no, I don't think that we needed to be too much influenced by the context or the situations, right? We think there are a set of universal rules that we should follow. That rules tells us what's right from wrong. So we need everybody should follow this specific set of rules. We call it and they also said for idealism, they also said harming others it can be avoided. It's your personal choice, so you can choose not to do so. So you see how I choose these two philosophies, right? And it's kind of related to the research I'm doing here. So again, based on this, I form my hypothesis. I propose my hypothesis, and that's my third group of hypothesis. The last group of hypothesis is about mindfulness. Okay, mindfulness is about technology. I consider it a little bit like a novel approach. It's a concept proposed by Thatcher's back in 2018, and they proposed it as a technology-related personalities, kind of like a personal trait. So it's a stable that can be used as a predictor to predict human behavior, and it's a positive trait. So I think it would be interesting because sharing is a behavior that conducted related to the technology, right? So I wanted to incorporate this construct into my model to test it and find out whether the mindfulness, about the technology will have impact on our sharing behavior as well. And again, I propose my hypothesis. Remember that I said because to understand human ethical and moral behaviors, there's too sensitive. So you want to take the burden off the shoulder of those people and your participants, just prime them, into a situation, ask them to imagine that you are in that situation, not to ask actual questions like, hey, I gave you this piece of information, are you going to share or not? Usually people are very sensitive, right? They're not going to tell you the truth. So you wanted to not to go down that route and just say, hey, this is a situation. So here is our scenarios. Basically, okay, I'll read it through, okay. The scenario says, because the scenario has represented the scenario of disinformation on the social media, here is what I constructed. So I say Jane has recently been hired as a salesperson and has been working really hard to impress her boss with her selling abilities. So, and she discovered there's a forum, customer forums, okay, and where those consumers return to it because it's very reputable and it provides lots of information. So she thinks this has a lot of influence on people's decision making as well in terms of a purchase. So she ended up intentionally create a fake account using fake ID. And of course, she used her fake account to publish all kinds of information about her own products and services, but kind of downgrades a little bit his competitors' product and the services. So by doing so, she diverted the sales and the actual purchase it to herself. So that's kind of scenario. So what she done is that obviously she created a fake account, right? That's wrong. And then she also spread wrong information on the media, on the social media, using the social media platform. And she ended up profit from this behavior. So it's ethical behavior, right? And it's misinformation, misleading information, and it's considered disinformation because it intentionally created wrong information. So that's my scenarios to prime my respondent. Now we're going to conduct our research, and research, I said we use survey, right? The survey is like a question items you ask your respondents. So we create a survey using the software again, and all those items I did not create it. Okay, we adapted from
where you need to speed it up a little bit.
Okay. So the process is like we do the scenario and we design our survey items. We conducted 2 pilot studies to revise the items, and then we do the full studies to collect all the data necessary. After we collected the data, we then, of course, run our analysis in using the software. And here is our results. Remember that for structural equation model, we have 2 parts of results. One is the past model results, another one is or structure model results, another is a measurement model results, right? So past model results are similar to regression model results. You can see those coefficients, right? Coefficients with the dots on the top, that means it's significant results. So as we can see that all our hypothesis has been proved or verified by our data. So that's a good thing about it. However, I wanted to point out like the bottom table here, right? In order to evaluate the effectiveness of our models, that we needed to check on 2 sets of particular values, that is R square values and F square values, that it's called effective size. Basically, it tells whether this model is effective enough, even though our model is verified, so that this is thought through good models. However, how effective that this model is to predict the actual behavior in the reality, and that's R square and F square comes into play. They're highlighted in red. We can see that even though the past model is significant, the effective size is not as big, especially for the more intensity, for the more philosophy part. It's a little bit small. Smaller means that it's not a complete bad thing. It's just saying that because the model cannot capture the reality completely, right? So it's just meaning that the morality, more personal philosophy does not, itself alone can explain how we evaluate dilemmas in our hand sufficiently. So that's how it explains it, and that's indicated the future improvement for your research, for my research particularly. And this is, and then the rest of the results is about the measurement model results. As you remember that it's a survey study, so we ask all kinds of questions about from our respondents in order to measure specific concept we're trying to measure. However, when you're using those questions to ask your respondents, right, and the questions, how are you going to make sure that your questions is the right questions, right? And whether it has, so there's what we call the measurement model results. You wanted to make sure all the items are reliable and it measures what it's supposed to measure. So we call it, for example, the reliability measures the extent to which the measurement results can be reproduced in a different studies if you repeated the studies in the same conditions, right? Conversion validity actually measures the correlations of those items, the questions, whether they are measured, they are measured the same construct or not. I'm not going to go through the details because of time restriction. And discriminated validity actually ensure that each items we have in our questionnaire for each construct are not cross-loading onto each others, and they're not interrelated with each other. Basically, we wanted the questions to measure exactly what is supposed to measure, not cross-measure each other's. Okay, so because if they cross-measure each other, then your results is having troubles. So that's the measurement model is about. Not going to go to the details. Now we got our results. We can see it proves that our model is effective. Of course, every research is not perfect. It always has some troubles. So that you can see from previous slides there, I have those highlighted in red. That means those are the areas I need to pay attention for the future study or make improvement, right? And so that concludes the actual research steps. We find out the answers. We find out that, dark personality can make impact on people sharing behaviors, right? The decision-making process of the more intensity actually does function as a regulator, does have impact on how we make our decision on sharing disinformation on the social media. So all the concepts and speculations and hypotheses are proved. So it's a good model. So that means we make contributions to the knowledge, every single research you have to ask, what kind of, contribution that it could make for other people's, to sort of like build up create another stepping stone for other future research, right? Here is our research contributions. First of all, we have this specific perspectives, right? Morality specific perspectives, which are not widely adopted by previous research. And the understanding all those individual variables, or we call it antecedents, and the role of an intensity can ensure that we bring adequate attention to those matters. And the supported conceptual models, it can also support a practical new insights in terms of how we can mitigate the information disorder in the social media. For example, we know that dark personality is a good predictor for people sharing disinformation or not on the social media. So we can do all kinds of text analysis or sentiment analysis to identify the people or normal individuals, social media users, their personality type, and using those scores to predict his or her sharing behaviors. And then we can set up a mechanism to kind of prevent him or her from sharing further, right? The wrong information or misleading information. And another thing is that the IT mindfulness, that is we can see it has a very high coefficient. So it seems like IT mindfulness as a positive practice actually can offer solutions to mitigate the disinformation sharing on the social media as well. So those are the contributions, theoretical contribution and also practical contribution. You wanted to see, by applying your results to the realities, to the actual practice, what kind of things that people can, learn from your research and improve our behavior and mitigate the wrong consequences, right? So that's what we call the research contributions. And each research also, like I just mentioned, is not perfect. It's always have, limitations. So those are the research limitations you have to address and make people, who willing to conduct the future research to be aware, and also make myself aware if I wanted to continue this route and, to improve my research, right? Those are the research limitations. For example, we only did one scenarios actually that the scenarios can be, expanded, based on the context and different aspects. So you can create more scenarios to verify your models, right? Because one scenario does not, we have a lack of evidence, I would say, or weak evidence to generalize our theories, our models to apply to all kinds of conditions, right? And also, this is not like a causal models. Causal model means like A has to lead to B, but usually that requires the design your research in temporal manners. A happened at time A, and then leads to behavior B happens at a different time. So if we can form this kind of model can prove in this temporal design, research design, then we can make more causal predictions. Right now, we can just say we predict it, but we cannot say this is a causal model. And also, the last thing I listed here is that we tackle the intention of people sharing, right? Disinformation rather than actual behaviors. So the future research will be very interesting if we can design a way to actually tackle the actual behavior, actual sharing behavior. Think about a way that will be very helpful and that will be interesting as well. So the last thing, after all your research, you talk about a contribution, you're talking about your limitations, and you also wanted to offer some kind of paths or directions for the future research for the other scholars as well. So you wrap up with your future research suggestions. For example, like I said, scenarios, just one scenarios in my study, so that could be expanded as a future studies under the categories of methodology designs, right? And also temporal design in order to improve the models, causal predictions. That's another area to improve. And for the models, as we can see, even though they're good models, and then R square and F square is not really high, that means that we can incorporate different variables into our model to increase the prediction powers. So those are the areas that the future research can address, can improve. And I think that's pretty much my presentation. Wrap it up. I hope that get your interest aroused.
Thank you, Wei. We have time for a few questions, so let's open up the floor for questions if there are any.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, like this generally happens to us, like people spread this false information and we tend to believe whether it's social media or the news channels, whatever it is. So how can we save ourselves from this information, from this loss, or how can we identify the information is wrong as an individual?
That's a great question, right? There's no cookie card answer to it as well. The reason we see so many of those kind of disinformation, malinformation, rumors, all this kind of information spread on the social media is because people having hard time to differentiate it. Like I talked about it at the beginning of the slides of this presentation. There are all kinds of reasons that I contributed to those information disorder on the social medias. To be able to, be a good social media users, I think the first thing I would recommend is that you have your mindfulness about this phenomenon. Right now, I can see that you ask this question, that you're already aware of these problems now. That's the first step. And the second step, of course, would be that you will just trying to verify the resources rather than just let your emotion or your mood controls you, or let your other, your great friendships, social tie relationships, can dictate you. You think twice for whatever information. Give a critical thinking about information you received, right? And you ask questions, whether always pause and ask whether this is true or not. You don't let it be full. So this is another step so we can take. And certainly, of course, is that through the learning of those what kind of information, the nature of those informations, that's more in depth of the learnings that you can learn to identify more quickly or efficiently what kind of information is the wrong information or not not accurate information. So there's, like I said, there's no specific cookie cutter solutions to it. And you, as each individuals, we have to be aware of the situation and then learn to trace the information to identify the true information from the wrong information. So that's the approach I would say.
Thank you, ma'am. That would be really helpful. And one more, ma'am. Like
Yes.
the models you told about, those were a little bit technical for us to understand.
Yes.
So, can you tell me in a simple language that how analytics help to reduce this information disorder?
How to reduce this is, like I said, there's everything of problems having like this information disorder, like I described it as two major reasons contribute to it, right? One is our individual. I think the first question is that a sort of like address those questions, that like how we as individual users that we can build up our awareness, be more careful, and give a critical thinking about this information we received. That will kind of like decrease the information. And for technical part, for technology part is that we can use all kinds of tracing methods in order to capture all those wrong information and, just capture them and, put them aside or cage them, and rather than let them spread it out into the on the social media and create further damages to the individual and society or organizations. In terms of like the models, I think that is that you can think of that there's a particular reasons, particular problems, and we think about problems in problems formed by bits and pieces, right? So in order to address these issues later on for your own techniques, to build up this techniques, you can think about your problems and, but dissect it in different parts and then address different parts one by one. I think that could be helpful. And then my model basically is doing the same thing. I think this is a problem. So I think the dog personality contribute to it, and by in this decision-making process. And also I think my philosophies can attribute to this decision-making process. So I pay attention to those little bits and parts, and then become more aware of those things, and it will help me mitigate the situation as well. So
Manjinder, that's an excellent question that you asked as to how does analytics help in preventing disinformation sharing. The two things that you need to understand here. Analytics is a tool.
Yes.
To understand and predict. It's not an answer. It's a means that we use to achieve a purpose, right? Now, whenever you're doing this kind of a thing, it is very important to understand what is that you're trying to predict or do, right? In this particular case, if you go back to your research model slide, if you look at, can you go back to that slide? Wait.
Yeah.
Research model. So when you look at
this one?
the research model,
there.
Yeah. So when you look at the research model, your dependent variable, which is on the right hand side of the slide, is called disinformation sharing intention, right? So what are we trying to measure here? We are trying to measure, do you as an individual have an intention to share disinformation? So you go onto Facebook, right? And you have hundreds and thousands of people who has the intention to share, right? And in doing that, we're doing two things. First, we are saying it is a function of moral intensity, how morally you are inclined to share disinformation. And two, what kind of a personality you have. We call them dark personalities. So we say these two things are going to determine whether you have an intention to share, right? So that is the question. The first question you asked, how can we figure out where it is? That is not being addressed in this model. We are essentially saying, who are the people who are sharing this? That is an interesting question, but that's a totally different research, right? So let's separate them out. So I think by doing this, we can probably tell that what kind of people are going to share what kind of information, disinformation, right? So it goes a little bit more in depth in that sense. Yeah, make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Rasleen.
Sometimes social media, we
There's an echo. I think maybe someone else can switch their mic off. Yeah, go ahead.
some. Yes, sir.
Kushdeep, you need to switch your mic off. Try
Say
again.
sometimes on social media, is it audible?
Yes.
Okay, sometimes on social media, we usually see that someone is deliberately share disinformation about something, or we can say about companies or an individual. At that spot of time, what steps that at that spot of time, the individual must take which step? The first step, what he should take to overcome or cope up with that problem.
That question is for me or Wei?
Anyone.
Okay. Wei, you want to try?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. I'll take it. The first step, I think, they are. I don't know whether you're aware of it or not. There are many kind of websites that are dedicated to fight those wrong or misleading information. So they call the fake news detecting site. So if you could, have a handful of those websites and just post your information, and that's could be the first. If you having difficulty yourself to tell whether it's wrong or not, you can go through this route. So.
Yeah, so I think just to add on to what Wei is saying, there are dedicated websites and outlets which spread disinformation, maybe about companies, maybe about something. So one of the prominent ones that came out, I won't talk about the politics related websites, but one of the prominent ones that came out a few years ago was in Brazil, where someone had created a Facebook page and it said, and the name of the page was, I hate Coca-Cola, right? And this was created by a disgruntled employee, someone who was working for Coke in Brazil and had some issues with the company. And he created this I Hate Coke website and it was brought down. Now that's a very interesting way. And many a times when you are an employee of a company, your personality, your context determines whether you are going to do this kind of a thing or not. Now, when you talk about moral scenarios in this particular model that you have, so your moral intensity, this is one of the outputs of this research as well, your moral intensity, which means what is your intensity level of whether you're going to be moral or not, is dependent on the context. If I keep pushing a person towards the wall, right, that is going to determine the outcome of the moral intensity, which in effect is going to have an impact on whether you're going to share disinformation or whatever, right? So that's an important part which companies need to bring to their own learning and say, how can we prevent this from happening, right? But that again is a very interesting but a totally different topic area to talk about.
Yeah, to ask to on top of that is in my model, I throw in this IT mindfulness. Actually, the model results prove that the mindfulness about technology, that kind of training is very effective. So as an organization, I would see that in order to curb the disinformation sharing, like in the examples that Dr. Dillon just threw in, is that the organization can create all kinds of training programs and to the mindfulness training programs, and that will help, at least according to the model, that will help to mitigate the sharing, the disinformation sharing.
Yeah. Anyways, so I think we are running out of time. If there are any other questions, Sumendra, you're going to say something?
Yeah, just one thing. There is a website called snopes.com, snopes.com, where I usually go to check whether something is authentic or not. I don't know if you are aware of such websites and how reliable they are.
Yeah, there's another way of doing it, Sumendra.
Yeah.
Just stop reading news.
Okay. Maybe, this was snopes.com. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
I've heard of it. I've never been there.
Never been there. Okay, but it comes up with a lot of interesting things. You know, if there is fake news, it tells you where did this fake news originate, how fast has it propagated, and why it is false. So
Yes.
yeah.
I don't have on the top of my head right now, but I think Dr. Pan, that what you just said, that it's one of those major ones, can detect it as wrong information on the social media. And there are other kinds. They're specialized in different kinds of information, like some just specialize in political related information, disinformation. Others specialize with, say, financial disinformation, etc. So I don't have it on the top of my head right now, but if you do the search, you will find out, usually what they give you good results, like what kind of companies are doing this or organizations are doing this.
I think the biggest disinformation that was going around recently was that those who are vaccinated will die within 2 years. And I also got that news somewhere, you know. So I think that was a big one.
Yeah, there are a lot of disinformation about COVID-19. I mean, every person has their own theory, right? So,
I know.
anyways,
Yeah,
no,
but
great.
thanks a lot, Vijay, for a very good presentation. So on behalf of
Thank you.
Akal Business School, we all thank you and wish you all the very best in your journey ahead. Maybe someday you'll visit us here,
Oh,
Akal,
yeah,
and some of our
absolutely.
students will probably collaborate with you on all the interesting research that you'll be doing in future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you.
helping me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, then